Joining us now, our Monday regular, the pride of Oliver, BC, and boy, did they miss him this weekend. From the Bob McCowan podcast, our friend Mr. John Shannon.
I think I missed them more than they missed me.
I'm sure you did. It was a lovely weekend in Penticton, Oliver, in the South Okanagan, John. And I got to say, it was fantastic to see the communities, plural, come back for this event, because we saw folks who came from Kelowna and Osoyoos and Oliver and OK Falls and all points in between. It was really a rallying point for hockey and a beautiful kickoff to the start of hockey season.
Well, and you know what? That venue is so good. You know, it's almost too big for the V's when they play BC junior hockey, but it's such a great facility. The people, they manage it so well. And for so long, that 4-team tournament was kind of the pearl of their hockey season. And to have it back, I'm sure has everybody in the area pretty excited. And the irony for me was, in many ways, it was scuppered over the years because there were two guys that said, we want to do it in our towns, Brad Treliving and Bob Nicholson. And where are they from? They're from Penticton.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
we had Brad.
Anyway, I'm glad it's back. I'm glad it's back.
Well, we had Brad on the show on Friday, and of course, Jonathan Wall, who used to work for the Canucks and now is in Penticton, who has been instrumental in getting the tournament off the ground and then bringing him back, mentioned to us Thursday, he goes, I don't think it hurt that we had some executives amongst the Western Canadian teams that were familiar here with Penticton. He also mentioned that Mr. Gillis had a tendency to a nice red wine, and the tournament started under Mike's watch with the Vancouver Canucks. So all things came together.
Well, there are some nice wines in that part of the country now.
So we're told. Yeah.
Oh, there sure is. I mean, Oliver is the wine capital, John.
You saw that
Canada,
sign, did you?
according to the the sign. Yeah, saw the sign. Still missing you from the sign, but we know the city planner in Oliver. Shout out Randy Ewell. We'll see if we can get that changed.
I went to school with Randy Ewell.
Yep. You went to school with some of the Hools. Randy told us. Randy's about our age, so I'd be surprised if you were in school with him, John. But yes, lots of Shannons, lots of Ools in Oliver over the years. Our first chance to talk to you since we've heard from the captain, Bo Horvat. He said all of the right things last week upon meeting the media. What's your sense on whether Pat Morris, Bo Horvat, or the Vancouver Canucks see the start of the season as a deadline to get an extension done?
Well, I don't. I don't think there is that deadline. I don't think that exists, and I don't think it can exist in the flat cap era. I think that's the real challenge. And let's face it, we talk about this. This has become a regular routine on this show and every other show. Is well, the teams have to move money. Teams have to do this, and there's no guarantee that all that money that is needed for Bo Horvat will be moved by, the 12th of October. So, if somebody's putting a deadline in place, I think that's a mistake, and I just can't imagine it being true. I think Bo wants to stay in Vancouver. I think Bo likes the scenario. Honored to be the captain. And I think the Canucks want him back, so they're just going to have to take time to make it work.
And to be clear, nobody is putting a deadline on this, although they did move quickly to get Miller done before he reported here in Vancouver. I guess the question is then, John, can Horvat and the Canucks deal with the distraction of final year UFA status throughout the season, whether that would be beneficial, because surely the Miller camp made it clear that they didn't want to have to deal with that as the season went along.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Patrick and Jimmy can probably deal with it a lot easier than Bo can, because Bo will probably be available a heck of a lot more than the other two gentlemen will. But Bo's got character, and Bo's got when you talk about Pat Morris and the people at Newport, he's got strong leadership with him. So I suspect that they'll have an approach that keeps Bo on the straight and stays in his lane and doesn't say anything silly.
What do you think separates a guy in a contract year from putting up crazy points, because we see that sometimes, and Nazem Kadri is a great example, to a guy that crumbles under the pressure? What separates those two kinds of people and players?
That That's an interesting one, Blake, because, I mean, over the years, you hear it all the time. Is, well, you know why he's playing. Well, it's a contract year. And
more often than not, it feels like it's that way, doesn't it?
Yes. And playing, you know, a guy playing on the edge to play for the next, 3 to 5 years, or even a 7 or 8 year contract. So I don't see many guys crumble very often in those contract years. But then that's a measure of what's supposed to happen and what goes on, and that gives an opening to a team to decide, well, listen, he was under contract, he didn't perform well, and maybe we're not that interested in extending him, or certainly not extending him at the numbers he originally wanted. And we see this in every sport. I mean, heck, not to change the topic, but look at what we're seeing in Toronto with Vladdy Guerrero, and what's going to happen with his next contract, and Bo Bichette and his next contract. So this is, in the end, unfortunately, this is part of business now, in the business of sports, and Bo has to face it, and Bo has to face it in a fat salary cap, knowing full well and with full belief that in the second year of his new deal, there'll be a heck of a lot more money available.
That's the thing. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine him being much better than he was last year, especially the way he finished. But I mean, man, if he's got the pressure of a final year of a contract on him, maybe he does get better. Maybe we see an even better Bo Horvat than the 30-goal Horvat we saw last year.
No, I can't imagine being better in the faceoff circle than he was last year. Let's face it. I think he was the best in the NHL. And I also think as the season wore on and once Bruce Boudreau became much more comfortable with him, that he started to rely on him in certain situations, in certain scenarios. And to me, that's the biggest measure. And the influence of Boudreau in all of this, which is not the money side, but the influence of Boudreau to say, hey, listen, I like JT Miller and I like Bo Horvat, and to have both of them on this roster is only a good thing for the Vancouver Canucks.
We walked past him on a patio, by the way. He was looking comfortable, and he's going into the final year of a contract as well. And generally, those coaches have a different view of things, right? We make it a negative thing for the coaches. The players in the final year were like, oh, he's in a contract year, he's going to be lights out. And then we have this different view of a coach going into the final year of a contract.
Well, that's the difference between being 28, 29, 30, and being 68. I think when you've lived the life that Bruce has lived, that he signed a deal that did this, and he still believes in himself, believes in the way he coaches, and you know what? If it continues the way it did last year with Bruce behind the bench, that it can only mean positive things for Bruce Boudreau a year from now as he's coaching in Vancouver.
It's also the difference between the singular authority of a head coach and being one of 20-some players on the bench, right? Somewhat are.
Well, and there's no salary cap for coaches, right?
There's no salary cap, but also there's got to be we believe you're going to be here next year, that you're going to be the boss, or he's easier to tune on out. And hey, later this week, John, we get our first opportunity to see how much Bruce is willing to change, how much time he has spent in the summer in terms of devising new systems or better systems or more structure, particularly for that defense corps, which was really the marching orders that Rutherford and Alvin gave him heading off into the summer. Yeah.
And his, let's face it, his use of information, how he will manage the numbers that the analytics group will give him, how he will utilize that in-game as opposed to pre-game. Those are challenges for Bruce. And by the way, I was shocked to think that Bruce was on a patio. I'm just shocked.
Let's move along now. It wasn't long ago that Bo Horvat and Jake Virtanen were both viewed as central pieces to the Vancouver Canucks future core and rebuilding efforts. As we know, it has been a long and tumultuous road for Virtanen. He signs a PTO with the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, John, they took the step towards Evander Kane and all his off-ice baggage last year, and they're willing to bring Jake Virtanen in on a PTO. I mean, it sounds like it's winning time in Edmonton, and they will deal with the peanut galleries who don't believe and don't like the fact that they brought these players in.
Well, I mean, Virtanen's an interesting one. Kane, there was a real division there was a real division with what we thought of Evander Kane. As a hockey player, Kane's play was never questioned. It was his personal life. It was the way he handled himself off ice that was the issue, and that was hard for the Oilers to go through that process to figure it out and whether to support it and whether to try to fix it. By the way, I give Dan Milstein, Kane's agent, a ton of credit for making this work. Virtanen's a little different because I think there's I don't think there's any questions off ice anymore for Virtanen. I think all the questions are on ice for Virtanen. I mean, I don't have to tell you guys, and I don't have to tell Canuck fans what kind of player Jake Virtanen is, and the answer is nobody knows anymore. I mean, was he that great shooting, physical winger? But the key inconsistencies through key times drove every coach that he played for nuts. And has he matured enough to understand that, hey, listen, Jake, this might be your last stop. This might be your last chance in North America to play this game at this level. And are you mature enough? Are you smart enough? Can you use your physical abilities to play the game, at least for this first year, or probably on a minimum deal of $750,000 with limited ice time, if he gets through camp, and there's no guarantee of that.
But you just nailed it. I mean, Evander Kane, they were willing to take the publicity hit because they felt he was a good hockey player. They could help him.
Sure.
Why do you take the publicity hit when you may not sign him, and he's probably not going to give you anything? Like, it's a peculiar predicament for the Oilers to put themselves into.
I guess Kenny Holland, I know Kenny well enough to know that he always believes in second chances and believes in people. And they have a need. They need more depth. We are not talking about Jake Virtanen becoming a top 6 forward in Edmonton. We're talking about Jake Virtanen potentially, and I think it's a long shot, potentially being a 10-minute, 11-minute guy. A bottom 6 forward. Can he use his physical nature? Remember, this is a team. Even though Evander Kane's their most physical forward now. They got rid of Zach Kassian over the summer. They need somebody physical. I'm not suggesting that Virtanen's of that ilk, but Virtanen, if he uses his body, becomes much more effective.
But I wonder if Kassian gave them license to do this, John, because Kassian had all sorts of questions about his off-ice behavior and even on ice as well, right? There was a lot of questions about him. They gave him a third chance, and they were rewarded. I mean, Zach Kassian was okay for them over the course of his handful of years in Edmonton, and I wonder if if Ken Holland sort of sees a Zach Kassian arc for Jake Virtanen.
Yeah, perhaps. Really, the guy, the advocate for Zach Kassian was Peter Chiarelli in Edmonton. He was the one who really resurrected Zach at a time when we remember coming out of Montreal. Zach was in big trouble. He had lots of issues, and they were able to turn it around. And Zach was able to turn it around. Married, kids. Is a wonderful guy and has been on the straight and narrow. So it's a good story that way. And perhaps I don't know I only know what I read about Jake's scenarios, but right now Jake's going to start with a blank slate when it comes to camp later in the week.
2 years ago, Ethan Bear was a 23-year-old right-side defenseman playing 22 minutes a night for the Edmonton Oilers. He is infinitely available via trade right now and has been for some time with the Carolina Hurricanes. And Nils Lundqvist is a one-time first-round draft pick of the New York Rangers, another right-side defenseman. He and his representatives say they are not going to training camp. They want to trade. Either of those guys worth a punt for you if you're the Vancouver Canucks looking for right-side defenseman?
Probably Lundqvist more than Bear for me. If there was somebody to talk about, I mean, I would assume Patrick has some familiarity with Lundqvist from Sweden. But Ethan Bear scares me. It's funny. In the bubble, in that 4-game series against Winnipeg, Ethan Bear took a lot of flack for being a guy that made mistakes in regulation in Game 4 and was on the ice for the overtime winner in triple overtime in Game 4. Didn't see much ice between the two shifts that he played there. But you know, he has not ever got back to that potential he had in that regular season you talked about, Matt. I think conditioning is an issue with him. Focus is an issue with him, and I think that they found that out in Carolina after they traded for him for Warren Foegele. You know, he had a great first full season in Edmonton and has not been the same since, and I can't tell you why.
And Lundqvist, he hasn't yet launched yet with the Rangers.
No, and let's face it, how deep is that Ranger blue line anyway? That's a pretty deep group, and you're not going to get much ice time on that group. So maybe he sees the tea leaves there as well, and perhaps there's something that can come about it. You know, but I think he's a project that you could be patient with too. And if he's willing to take the gamble. The interesting thing for me is there's a lot of guys now, particularly Europeans, that come to North America, think they're going to make the NHL right away, and if they don't, they'd rather go home than take the assignment in the American League. And I think that happens more and more often now. Not necessarily the KHL, but to go back to Sweden, go back to Finland, and you have to wonder if a guy like Lundqvist, you know, needs more time. If the Rangers don't think he can play that much, if the Rangers aren't prepared to put that time in for him, that if he's not better going back home and coming and being more mature in a couple of years.
Wonderful stuff, John. Thank you for this, my friend. We will catch up next Monday.
Have a great day, guys.